Each of our lives is an endless flow of changes. There are times when we feel joyful and at peace, but there are also moments when our minds are disturbed by unexpected adversities. What causes our suffering? What makes us anxious? Why do we keep chasing after things beyond our control, only to bind ourselves in fear and insecurity? The Buddha taught that the root of suffering lies in attachment, in the mind's refusal to let go. When we hold on too tightly to something, whether it's material possessions, people, or even our own thoughts and expectations, we inadvertently trap ourselves in a cycle of dissatisfaction. However, if we can learn to let go, not by abandoning, but by releasing the need for control, we will find true freedom in our hearts. In this video, we will explore the power of letting go and how to apply it in our daily lives. We will understand that suffering is not the end, but an opportunity for growth. We will realize that the way we engage in self-talk determines our happiness or misery. And most importantly, we will learn how to embrace our fate, not only accepting but also cherishing every experience, whether joyous or sorrowful, whether easy or challenging, as an essential part of the path to self-improvement. Letting go is not avoidance, nor is it an attitude of indifference toward life. It is a profound wisdom that helps one break free from the bondage of suffering. The Buddha once taught that everything in this world is impermanent, and nothing lasts forever. All phenomena arise and pass away according to the law of dependent origination. When we cling to something, we are tying ourselves with invisible threads of craving and delusion. The tighter we hold, the greater the suffering, because nothing escapes the law of change. The practice of letting go is a long journey, one that requires wisdom, patience, and diligent effort on the path of spiritual practice. Some may mistakenly think that letting go means giving up or giving in, but in fact, it is an active renunciation, not allowing the mind to become entangled, not letting emotions dominate, yet still living fully in the present with compassion and wisdom. When one knows how to let go correctly, they are no longer bound by the ups and downs of life, not drawn into the whirlpool of greed, hatred, and ignorance, and as a result, they attain peace and serenity. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha teaches, just as the lotus rises from the mud without being stained, the wise person lives in the world without being swept away by desires and ignorance. This is the spirit of letting go, living in the world without being controlled by it, without being bound by desires and suffering. Attachment to fame, power, and wealth causes people to seek and worry incessantly, feeling uneasy. Many people mistakenly believe that having abundant wealth and power will bring happiness. However, the truth is, the more we cling, the more we fear losing it, the more entangled we become in these things, and our minds become more troubled. A wise person does not place happiness in the impermanent things of the world because they understand that all of these are illusory, like morning dew on the grass, like the reflection of the moon on the water, appearing and disappearing, nothing is permanent. In life, many people suffer simply because they do not know how to let go. When someone insults them, instead of listening and reflecting to understand the root of the words, they hold on to anger, burning themselves in the fire of resentment. If someone speaks ill of you, it does not mean you are truly like that. It is only when you cling to those words, allowing them to invade your mind, that they have the power to cause you pain. But if you know how to let go, those words are nothing more than a passing breeze, unable to disturb your inner peace. There is a story in Buddhism about two monks on their way back to the monastery. They encountered a young woman who wanted to cross the river but had no boat. One of the monks picked her up and carried her across the river, placing her on the other shore. Afterward, he continued his journey with his companion. However, throughout the long journey, the monk accompanying him continually criticized, "Why did you carry that woman? We are monks, we should not touch women." The monk who had carried the woman calmly responded, "I placed her down on the other side of the river, yet you are still carrying her in your heart." This story illustrates that letting go is not just an external action but also a renunciation in the heart. When the mind is still attached, even a small thought can bind us in the cycle of clinging. One of the most effective methods of practicing letting go is meditation and mindfulness. When the mind is disturbed, it is easy to be swept up by negative emotions, but when we return to our breath and observe the movement of the mind without interference, we gradually realize that all emotions and thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky of the mind. When we understand the impermanent nature of everything, we no longer get caught up in the emotional highs and lows, and thus the mind becomes liberated. In the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the Buddha teaches, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." All phenomena in this world have no fixed existence, they arise due to conditions. When we understand this, we will no longer cling to things that do not belong to us, nor will we suffer when we lose something. If we can let go of attachments, inherent prejudices, and resentments in our hearts, the mind will immediately become lighter and more peaceful. The practice of letting go in Buddhism is not only applicable in dealing with the world but also in letting go of the self. People often suffer because they cling to the ego, thinking of themselves as the center, believing they are right, important, and must be acknowledged. But this attachment is the source of suffering. When someone criticizes us, we immediately feel hurt because our ego has been touched. When someone does not treat us as we expect, we feel dissatisfied because we think they should act differently. If we understand that the ego is merely a collection of transient thoughts and emotions, we will no longer cling to it, and thus the mind will become peaceful and free. Letting go is a process of persistent training, it cannot be achieved overnight. Some attachments have deeply ingrained themselves in the consciousness for many lifetimes, and without continuous reflection and practice, they cannot be easily released. Therefore, a practitioner of Buddhism must have patience and use wisdom to illuminate their path. Start with the smallest things, letting go of anger, worry, or a negative thought, and gradually the mind will open, like a calm lake with no ripples. There is a story about a famous Zen master. One day, a person came to ask him, "How can I let go of all my troubles?" The Zen master did not answer but instead handed him a cup of water. He said, "Hold this cup of water tightly in your hand." The person did as he was told. After a while, the person's hand began to feel tired. The Zen master asked, "Do you feel the weight?" The person replied, "Yes." The Zen master said, "If it feels heavy, why not let it go?" Similarly, the troubles and suffering in our hearts are like the cup of water, we hold on to them and refuse to let go, so we feel burdened and tired. If we learn to release them, our hearts will become light and free. Life constantly changes, and people change as well. No one can hold on to anything forever. So why should we suffer over things that do not belong to us? When we learn to let go, we will feel peace, lightness, and freedom from worry, fear, and dissatisfaction. This is the door that leads us to true happiness. Suffering is an inevitable part of human existence, for all beings in this world carry within them the karmic forces accumulated over countless lifetimes. However, the Buddha taught that suffering is not an inherent, unchanging feature of life, it arises due to causes and conditions. We can transform it into an opportunity for awakening, growth, and liberation. This requires deep contemplation and inner strength, so that we are not swept away by negative emotions, but rather use adversity as a stepping stone to advance on the path of practice. Suffering is not merely a negative experience to be avoided, it is a tool for refining the mind, for sharpening oneself just as fire tempers steel and a gem is polished to shine. Without challenges, one cannot fully understand the nature of oneself, cannot develop wisdom, nor learn patience, compassion, and tolerance. Suffering is a precious lesson that life presents to each individual, but not everyone is awake enough to recognize it. Some are overwhelmed by suffering, harboring resentment and blaming life, while others know how to use it as an opportunity to grow. The difference between these two types of people lies not in their circumstances, but in their attitude and ability to reflect. A true practitioner does not flee from suffering nor complain about it. Instead, they calmly accept it as a lesson from the unfolding of conditions. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha taught, "No one can save us except ourselves." We must walk the path of awakening by ourselves, for Buddhas are merely guides. This means that, no matter how much suffering life brings, if we perceive it correctly and look deeply into the nature of suffering, we will find the way out. One fundamental cause of suffering is attachment. People often cling to desires, but life is inherently impermanent, and all things move according to the law of dependent origination. Nothing lasts forever. We cling to our bodies, but eventually, they grow old and decay. We cling to relationships, yet people's hearts change. Today they may love, but tomorrow they may be indifferent. We cling to fame and fortune, yet when we close our eyes for the final time, all of it will be left behind, like dust. If we continue to chase after these impermanent things without recognizing their true nature, we will forever be controlled by suffering. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, which offer guidance to understand and transform suffering. The first truth is the truth of suffering. Life is full of suffering: birth, aging, sickness, death, the separation from those we love, the encounters with those we hate, the unfulfilled desires. These are all suffering. But this truth is not meant to make us sink into pessimism. It is meant to help us see the reality of human life. The second truth is the truth of the cause of suffering. Suffering does not arise on its own, it comes from craving, attachment, anger, and ignorance. If we know how to reflect and stop clinging, to abandon the blind desires, then suffering will dissolve in its place. The third truth is the truth of the cessation of suffering. When the mind is pure, when the heart has let go, when wisdom has awakened, and when we no longer cling to anything, then suffering has no place to exist. The fourth truth is the truth of the path to end suffering. The Buddha taught the Noble Eightfold Path, which includes right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This is the path that helps people overcome suffering and attain peace and enlightenment. Let us reflect on ourselves. How do we respond when faced with adversity? Do we resent, torture ourselves, or do we accept and seek transformation? A wise person always asks, "What does this suffering teach me?" When we understand the deeper causes of suffering, we will know how to accept it calmly, no longer allowing it to control us. Just as a martial artist cannot reach mastery without experiencing pain and falling, how could a gem shine without undergoing the process of polishing? Similarly, humans cannot strengthen their minds without challenges and suffering. How can one learn patience, develop wisdom, or cultivate resilience without facing difficulties? One of the most effective ways to transform suffering is through meditation. When we sit in stillness, when we observe each breath and refrain from chasing after thoughts, we begin to see that the true nature of suffering is simply like ripples on the surface of a mental lake. When the mind is still as water, pain and sorrow no longer disturb us. We should practice mindfulness in every action, thought, and word. When walking, know that you are walking. When eating, know that you are eating. When encountering suffering, know clearly what you are experiencing without reacting hastily. When someone offends us, instead of becoming angry, observe our feelings. When facing failure, instead of becoming discouraged, find the lesson hidden within. Life is like a river, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent. But if we know how to steer, we can still reach the other shore in peace. Suffering is not our enemy, it is the teacher that helps us grow. And if we accept it with an open heart and clear wisdom, we will find peace even amidst life's storms. The inner dialogue is the stream of thoughts that one continuously creates in the mind. It is like a river, sometimes calm and still, at other times turbulent and rushing, and at other moments clouded by negative and unwholesome thoughts. If one fails to control this inner dialogue, it becomes easy to fall into a vortex of self-doubt, anxiety, skepticism, and anger. However, if we can direct our stream of thoughts with mindfulness, we have the power to transform the mind, bringing forth peace and clarity in our lives. The Buddha taught that the human mind is like a garden. If we do not cultivate good seeds, the weeds of affliction will grow and overshadow the light of wisdom. Likewise, if the inner dialogue is filled with self-blame, self-deprecation, or thoughts of resentment and anger, we will imprison ourselves within the confines of our own mind. On the other hand, if we plant seeds of positivity, compassion, and wisdom, our hearts will gradually become open, pure, and steadfast in the face of life's fluctuations. The root cause of being often swayed by negative thoughts is ignorance and attachment to the ego. When the ego is inflated, we easily experience self-doubt in failure or arrogance in success. Both of these states disturb the mind. A wise person is not shackled by narrow thinking. Instead, they practice reflection to recognize that all phenomena are merely temporary manifestations arising from causes and conditions. When a negative thought arises, instead of identifying with it, we should learn to observe it as a passing cloud drifting across the sky, neither clinging to it nor rejecting it, simply acknowledging it and letting it go. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha teaches, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. This means that our thoughts shape our lives. If the mind is filled with negative thoughts, self-doubt, and resentment, our lives will inevitably be immersed in the darkness of suffering. But if the mind is nourished with pure, positive, and wholesome thoughts, life will become peaceful and fulfilling. So, how can we transform negative thoughts into wholesome ones? One important method is to practice mindfulness. When we observe our stream of thoughts without judgment and without being swept away by them, we gradually come to understand their impermanent nature. For example, when a negative thought arises, we simply recognize, this is a negative thought, and gently redirect our attention back to the breath. By practicing this regularly, we will come to see that no thought can control us unless we allow it to. Meditation is also an effective method for mastering the inner dialogue. When meditating, we can focus on the breath, the sensations in the body, or a mantra to help calm the mind. When an unwholesome thought arises, instead of reacting immediately, we simply observe it, acknowledging it without letting it dominate our mind. As a result, the mind becomes more peaceful, clear, and less susceptible to the influence of negative thoughts. In addition to meditation, using positive affirmations is another way to reprogram the mind. Instead of saying, I'm not good enough, we can replace it with, I am constantly learning and growing. Instead of saying, I can't do this, we can say, I will do my best and accept the outcome with a calm mind. When these affirmations are repeated daily, the mind gradually accepts them, forming a new habitual way of thinking. The Buddha once said, what we think, we become. Therefore, to change our lives, we must first change the way we think. Another essential aspect of mastering the inner dialogue is letting go. When we become too attached to negative thoughts, we inadvertently empower them. But if we learn to see every thought as a flowing stream, nothing is fixed, we will no longer be controlled by them. It is like a river, no matter how murky the water, as long as we do not stir it, over time the mud will settle, and the water will become clear. The same applies to the mind. If we know how to let it settle, afflictions and unease will naturally fade away. Moreover, surrounding ourselves with positive people, reading uplifting books, and listening to wise teachings can help nourish the mind toward goodness. If we live in an environment where everyone complains and blames, we are easily influenced. But if we choose our companions wisely and listen to the teachings of enlightened beings, our minds will gradually be shaped in a positive direction. Life is a mirror reflecting the state of our minds. If we see the world as full of suffering and injustice, it is because our minds are still filled with negative thoughts. But if we see life as abundant with love, opportunities, and growth, it is a sign that our minds are turning toward the light of wisdom. Therefore, to change the world, we must first change ourselves. And that change begins with the smallest thoughts, with the inner dialogue we engage in every day. Life is an unceasing series of fluctuations. There are moments of joy, times of ease, and at other times, we face obstacles. Humans tend to cling to their egos, desiring life to unfold according to their wishes, yet reality always differs from our expectations. Unwanted things still happen, losses still arrive, and pain still touches our hearts. Without mindfulness, we may fall into a perpetual state of suffering, constantly complaining about fate and feeling unjustly treated by what we endure. But the wise understand that everything in life follows the law of cause and effect, and instead of lamenting, they learn to embrace their fate, accepting every twist of life as an essential part of the journey toward enlightenment. In Stoic philosophy, the concept of amor fati emphasizes accepting and loving one's fate, whether it brings happiness or sorrow. This mirrors the teachings of Buddhism, where the Buddha explains that all phenomena in the universe follow the law of dependent origination, and nothing is random or beyond the reach of the law of karma. When we are born into a particular circumstance, facing certain challenges and difficulties, it is the result of past actions and also an opportunity for us to practice and transform our minds. When we understand this, we no longer resist or shy away from adversity. Instead, we welcome it with equanimity, viewing it as a tool for our growth and progress. However, accepting our fate does not mean passively surrendering or giving up in the face of circumstances. In Buddhism, there is a subtle but important distinction between acceptance and resignation. Acceptance implies awareness and understanding, while resignation is weakness and abandonment of responsibility for one's life. A practitioner is not passive, helpless in the face of life's challenges, but rather, they know how to use every situation to cultivate patience, compassion, and wisdom. When faced with hardship, instead of complaining, they ask, "What lesson is life trying to teach me through this experience?" By changing our perspective, we transform every obstacle into an opportunity for growth. There is a story in Buddhism about a wise old monk, who, as a young novice, endured countless hardships. One day, someone asked him, "Master, you have faced so much suffering in your life, yet you always wear a peaceful smile. How is that possible?" The monk replied, "Whenever I encounter adversity, I do not ask why it happens to me. Instead, I remind myself, this is the path I must walk to achieve enlightenment. If I resist, I only prolong my suffering." In truth, what happens to us is not as important as how we respond to it. One person may face adversity with calm, while another is consumed by endless anguish in the same situation. The difference lies in their attitude of acceptance. If we constantly compare our fate to others, we will never feel satisfied, always perceiving injustice and suffering. But if we learn to be grateful even for challenges, we will realize that nothing in life is without purpose. Everything happens for a reason, and we must learn to trust in the workings of the universe. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha teaches, reflect on life as a river. Whether the waters are rough or calm, the river continues its journey, undeterred by any obstacle. Humans are the same. We must learn to accept all that comes and goes, without attachment or resistance. This means that the more we try to control life according to our own desires, the more powerless and suffering we will feel. But when we let go of attachment, we will find everything becomes lighter, no longer drawn into negative emotions. One way to practice a more fatty in daily life is to develop gratitude even in difficult circumstances. When we face failure, instead of seeing it as something regrettable, we should try to view it as a lesson that helps us grow. When we encounter painful events, instead of blaming, we can reflect on what we can learn from them. The Buddha taught that every event in life has two sides. If we focus only on the negative, we will see suffering, but if we seek the deeper meaning, we will see how we have matured through each experience. Another practice is mindfulness to observe the mind. When a negative emotion arises, instead of letting it dominate, we simply acknowledge, this is dissatisfaction, or this is resentment. When we observe emotions without identifying with them, we gradually gain control over our minds instead of being controlled by them. Additionally, when facing difficulties, remember that you are not alone in this journey. Everyone on earth faces their own challenges, struggling with their own fate. When we understand this, our hearts will open, resentment will lessen, and our compassion for others will grow. The Buddha once taught, every living being carries their own burden. When we realize this, we suffer less and can love more. Looking at the life of the Buddha, we see that he was not born in poverty or misfortune. However, it was his renunciation of royal life, entering the monastic life, and enduring numerous hardships that led him to enlightenment. If he had not faced those trials, he might have remained a prince living in luxury, never having the chance to realize the truth. This shows that it is through the difficulties and losses in life that we are shaped and advance on our spiritual path. In conclusion, to embrace our fate, we must change our perspective on life. Let us see every challenge as an opportunity, every loss as a lesson, and every adversity as a means to understand ourselves more deeply. When we stop resisting and learn to accept with a peaceful mind, we will realize that nothing is unjust or meaningless. Everything has its cause and condition, and the only thing we can do is live fully in the present, with gratitude and tranquility. Mastering one's emotions is one of the most important aspects on the path of practice and intellectual development. Human beings, influenced by delusions, often let emotions dominate, causing the mind to become disturbed like a lake disturbed by the wind. When happy, we are overwhelmed with joy; when sad, we sink into sorrow; when angry, we express words and actions that harm ourselves and others. Without mindfulness, we become slaves to our emotions, allowing them to drag us and control our entire lives. The Buddha taught, the mind is the master, the mind leads. If the mind is tainted and we speak or act, suffering will follow us like a wheel follows the tracks of the ox pulling the cart. This means that all our actions and reactions come from the mind. When the mind is disturbed, so too will be our words and actions, lacking skill and wisdom. Conversely, when we are able to master our emotions, our minds become steady and clear, helping us to respond with wisdom and compassion. Mastering emotions does not mean suppressing or denying negative emotions, but rather recognizing, observing, and transforming them. In Buddhism, there is a very important method that helps us control our emotions, and that is mindfulness. When practicing mindfulness, we learn to observe our emotions without attachment, without identifying with them. For example, when anger arises, instead of reacting immediately, we can remind ourselves, this is anger. When we observe without getting swept away, the anger will gradually subside. Like a boatman navigating through rough waves, if we calmly steer the boat, no matter how strong the waves may be, they will not capsize us. On the other hand, if we panic and lose direction, we are likely to be swept away by the waves. In life, many situations can make it easy for us to be controlled by our emotions. When something goes wrong, we may become frustrated and blame others. When criticized, we may become angry or feel hurt. When achieving success, we may become arrogant. Each moment in life is a challenge for us to practice mastering our emotions. To achieve this, continuous training is necessary. One important way to train in mastering emotions is learning to let go. The Buddha taught that the main cause of suffering is attachment, clinging to what we desire or resisting what we do not want. When we have high expectations for something, we easily become disappointed if things do not go as we hope. When we become rigid in our opinions or personal views, we easily develop anger when others disagree. But if we learn to let go and accept everything as it is, we will no longer be dragged by our emotions. For example, when someone insults us, instead of reacting immediately with anger, we might reflect, their words are just sounds. If I do not pay attention to them, they cannot harm me. Or when faced with a difficult situation, instead of complaining, we can remind ourselves, this is an opportunity for me to cultivate patience. When we change our perspective, we will see that nothing truly harms us except our own thoughts and reactions. Furthermore, another important method for mastering emotions is practicing meditation. Meditation helps us observe the mind, recognize emotions, and transform them consciously. When sitting in meditation, we can reflect on the emotions arising in our minds without judgment, without attachment, simply looking deeply into their nature. When we understand that all emotions are impermanent, coming and going like clouds in the sky, we will no longer be controlled by them. There is a story that tells of a day when a Zen master was sitting in meditation in the forest, and a stranger came and insulted him. The Zen master remained seated, showing no anger or reaction. The stranger continued to curse, and the master remained silent. Finally, the stranger asked, "Why do you not get angry when I curse you?" The Zen master smiled and replied, "If someone gives me a gift, but I do not accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The stranger thought for a moment and replied, "Of course, it belongs to the giver." The Zen master nodded, "Exactly. In the same way, if you curse me and I do not accept it, those words still belong to you." This story shows that negative emotions can only affect us when we allow them to. If we are steadfast and do not let our minds be swayed by others' words or actions, we will maintain inner peace. In addition, another important factor in mastering emotions is developing compassion. When we have compassion, we no longer view others as adversaries or enemies, but as beings suffering, just like us. When someone harms us, instead of becoming angry, we might think, this person may be acting this way because they are also suffering. When someone acts unkindly, we can reflect, perhaps they lack the wisdom to see the consequences of their actions. With compassion, we will be less affected by negative emotions because we understand that everyone is struggling with their own issues. Mastering emotions is not something that can be achieved instantly, it is an ongoing process of practice. Each day, we can observe ourselves, reflect on situations where we reacted emotionally, examine the causes of our disturbances, and find ways to train ourselves to become more resilient. Gradually, we will realize that we no longer become easily angry at careless words, we no longer feel disappointed when things do not go as expected, and we are no longer swept away by negative emotions. At that point, we will have truly mastered our minds, and as a result, life will become more peaceful and lighthearted. As the Buddha taught, one who masters their mind is not afraid of anything. Keep the mind like the earth, unmoved when it is dug up, unmoved when it is fertilized. When the mind remains unmoved by praise or blame, gain or loss, victory or defeat, that is true liberation. Only when we master our emotions can we truly master our lives. One's identity is not merely the image they present to the world, but more importantly, it is how they perceive themselves deep within their soul. If one's identity is founded on true understanding, grounded in wisdom and enlightenment, then it remains unshakable. However, if one's identity is built upon superficial, fragile things such as fame, status, wealth, or the approval of others, then even the smallest event can cause it to waver. In Buddhist teachings, people are often bound by attachment to the self, which means clinging to the ego, to what we perceive as I and mine. When someone insults us, we feel hurt because we have identified ourselves with their words. When we face failure, we may feel worthless, believing that success or failure defines who we are. However, the Buddha teaches that everything in this world is impermanent, including reputation, wealth, and the concepts we associate with our sense of self. If we cling to impermanent things to define our identity, we will constantly live in insecurity, fear, and suffering. So, how can we build a firm identity? First, we must understand that identity is not something fixed, but a process of training, a transformation of the inner self. The Buddha does not encourage us to attach to any fixed model of self, but instead, he encourages us to live with mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion, so that these qualities become the core of who we are. When we understand this, we are no longer swayed by external factors because we realize that our true identity does not lie in what others say or think about us, but in our own inner nature. One important method for building a firm identity is practicing deep self-awareness. In Buddhism, self-awareness is not just about understanding our preferences or personality traits, but more importantly, it is about understanding the true nature of the mind, understanding why we react in certain ways in different circumstances. When we observe the mind, we can see which factors influence our identity. Are we being led by greed, anger, and delusion? Are we defining ourselves through external things? We should reflect and ask ourselves, who am I when I have no fame, no status, no achievements that I typically pride myself on? Where does my value come from what I own, or from the wisdom and inner qualities I possess? Am I seeking the approval of others to feel valuable? These questions help gradually eliminate false perceptions and bring us back to ourselves. When we understand ourselves clearly, we will no longer be shaken by praise, blame, gain, or loss. In addition to self-awareness, we need to build an identity based on solid inner values. In Buddhism, these values are morality, sila, concentration, samadhi, and wisdom, panna. When a person lives by moral conduct, maintaining ethical standards, not harming themselves or others, they do not need to seek external validation to feel valuable. When a person has concentration, meaning stability in the mind, not shaken by life's fluctuations, they are no longer controlled by emotions or circumstances. And when a person possesses wisdom, an understanding of karma, impermanence, and non-self, they no longer cling to transient things to define their identity. A firm identity is not about stubbornness or protecting the ego. On the contrary, someone with a firm identity is someone who adapts without losing their core values, listens without being swayed by wrong ideas, accepts without being carried away by the tide of worldly life. Like a great tree, even though the winds may rise, the branches and leaves may sway, the roots remain deeply planted in the earth, not uprooted. One example from the scriptures tells of a monk who was insulted by someone. Instead of reacting with anger or sadness, he simply smiled and asked, "If someone brings me a gift and I do not accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" This answer shows the stability of a practitioner when faced with others' words. When we understand that what others say or do cannot define us, we will no longer be affected by them. In life, many people lose their sense of identity simply because they try to please others. They fear rejection, criticism, or not being acknowledged. But if our identity is based on others' acceptance, then it is not a true identity, but merely an illusion. A person with a firm identity is one who does not need to prove their worth to anyone, because they already know their value from within. To cultivate this, we need to constantly reflect on impermanence. We should contemplate that everything we cling to, fame, status, recognition, does not last forever. If we base our identity on these things, sooner or later, we will lose our stability. But if we base it on wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, then nothing can take away our true identity. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha teaches, the wise person is not disturbed by praise or blame. Just as a tall mountain is not shaken by strong winds, the enlightened being is not moved by praise or criticism. Let us become people with a firm identity like this. Do not let external things determine your worth. Live with wisdom, compassion, and true understanding. When we have a firm identity, we will no longer be hurt by the words or actions of others. When we know who we are, where we are headed, and what we live for, no one can shake us. Build your identity not based on what you have, but on what you are. Let the true inner values define who you are, not the fleeting things outside. When we achieve this, we will no longer fear any challenge, and our life will always be peaceful and strong in any circumstance. The journey to inner peace is not a destination, but an ongoing practice. Every day, we have the opportunity to cultivate wisdom and patience, to learn how to let go of what is unnecessary, and to live a life free from the constraints of the mind. No one can avoid difficulties, but what matters is how we choose to face them. When we change our perspective, when we understand that each challenge carries a lesson, life becomes lighter and more meaningful. I hope that the insights shared in this video can help you find a new perspective, a path to walk more firmly on your own journey. If you find this helpful, continue to explore and practice, for true transformation does not come from merely listening, but from applying what we learn in each moment of life. Let your mind be free, and you will see that happiness has never left you, it has only been waiting for you to open your heart and receive it.